Welcome to the webinar. My name is Henning Pisunker. I'm an associate professor at INSEAD. Today at Between the Lines, the webinar of INSEAD Lifelong Learning, we have Ethan Mollick from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Ethan, it's a great, if you're online, it would be great for you to join. Fantastic. Before we get started, kind of jump right into the middle of it, I'm going to say a few things about you. I have actually known Ethan's work, I believe, since relatively exactly. I actually looked it up yesterday. 15 years. It's the first time I encountered one of your working papers in 2009. This is your work on video games. Ethan has been at the leading front of technology for a very, very long time. Ethan made a big splash coming out of MIT, kind of making video games actually a subject in academic research. There's been literally hundreds of papers afterwards building on his work. Ethan then wrote one of the pioneering papers on crowdfunding. I didn't look it up recently, but it has thousands and thousands of citations. So he became the leading scholar on crowdfunding. He got tenured at the Wharton Business School, and then he took on AI and has now become one of the leading scholars. I don't think I'm allowed to kind of say who gets him out as a guest speaker, but all the big corporations these days get Ethan out and say, like, we want to understand what this is about. How can we manage this? How can we work with this? I have so many positive things to say about Ethan. It's hard to say. There's probably no one who I feel more energized after talking with Ethan. He's like always bubbling with fantastic ideas. It's not by accident that he's always at the leading front. He's in a beautiful way, incredibly curious and incredibly empathetic. So it's a great pleasure and great honor to have you here, Ethan. Thank you so much for joining.
That is such a flattering intro. I'm thrilled to be here.
Ethan, tell us about the book. The book has just come out, CoIntelligence, Living and Working with AI, what it is about. What are the big ideas here?
Okay, so, it's a really interesting thing. I found myself accidentally sort of at the center of a lot of AI things. Over the last year and a half or so, I worked in the media lab with Marvin Minsky back in the day. He was one of the founders of AI, but I've never been the technical person. I've always been the sort of business, how does this all matter person. And you're kind of talking about the themes of my work. I've been thinking about games and teaching at scale and teaching at distance for a very long time. So I've been playing with AI for a while. Actually, my students, even before ChatGPT came out, cheating with AI. There was an explicit assignment where they had to cheat by writing an essay with AI even before chat came out. So I was kind of in place when this all happened. And I've kind of been watching for the front lines as AI use spread and took off. I've written a few papers on it. And I talk to all the AI companies once a week or so. And the idea was like to try and give a sense of where we are and what's going on. And it's a little hard, right? A book is against a moving target like AI. I think we kind of nailed in this space, but it's kind of an overview. It's sort of the idea of where we are right now at the capability curve of AI is that it does act as a kind of co-intelligence. If you use it properly, it can pretty much offer enhancements to many forms of human performance. It's not good at some things you'd expect it to be good at others. And the attempt was to kind of show where we are and where we might be heading in the near future. And my inspiration was actually a book that inspired me when I was an undergraduate called Being Digital by Nicholas Negroponte, who wrote in the 90s. He was the head of the media lab about where we were with digital technology. And I wanted to try and do the same thing here.
Didn't he do the famous $100 laptop? Is that him or?
That was him afterwards, yes.
Okay. What is the co-intelligence, Ethan? What's the idea behind the term? I think it's a great title for the book. What do you mean by co-intelligence?
So the idea is that that AI is not alive, it's not sentient, but it can make you think it is, right? We don't 100% know, nobody actually quite knows why the transformer architecture that was developed in 2017 based on other machine learning architectures, why with enough scale it sort of starts to act like it thinks like a human. And so I don't deal with the philosophy very much behind it, but I do try and deal with the practical implications. And we now have a profusion of papers and research. Some of it I've done, some of it other colleagues have done in other places, and lots of other people are working on this that shows that practically, for example, the AI out-invents humans. So my colleagues, Carl Ulrich and Christian Turwich, who literally wrote the book on innovation, and their graduate students and another professor had 200 of the MBA students in their class on innovation, a famous one that's raised a lot of money, uh, generate ideas. And then they had the AI generate 200 ideas. They had outside people judge the ideas by willingness to pay. Of the top 40 ideas by willingness to pay, 35 came from GPT-4, only 5 from the students in the room. When we did a study at BCG, we found a 40% improvement from naively using GPT-4. Like, these are very big effects with the most elite sort of business uses. We're seeing some of the things in law and medicine. It still doesn't replace a human, but if you're not using this as a supplement for creativity, for innovation, for even if, for writing, then you're sort of leaving yourself behind. We have the option to actually boost intelligence for the first time. We've had for a long time machines that could boost your ability to do work, right? If I told you that you need to dig a ditch behind your backyard, you wouldn't get your 20 stoutest friends together to dig a ditch. You would hire a machine or a crew to do that for you, or rent equipment to do it. In the same way, we've never had a machine that improves how we think or what we can think, and now we do. We have like a backhoe of the mind, and that's a really big deal.
You see, there's something qualitatively different about it, right? So take your study you did with the BCG consultants, right? Where you basically say like, look, in classical kind of consulting task, ChatGPT is better than these BCG consultings. What is qualitatively different about this than comparing a car to a horse and say like, hey, it has more pulling power? I think it's different, but I have a hard time nailing it, Ethan. What's different about ChatGPT or like Gen AI more broadly than compared to like prior technologies? Is there something about this technological shift where you would say like, that's qualitatively different?
I mean, I think it's different in every possible way. We've never had the only general purpose, thing that's improved human thinking before has been like this, like, coffee, basically. Yeah, we both got them, right? So I don't think it's just qualitative. Like, we've had a whole bunch of revolutions around mechanical use. We've had revolutions around cognitive tools like spreadsheets, and you studied, chess computers, right? In narrow fields. We've never had general intelligence in this kind of way before, right? So like, it is a new thing in the world. And I don't think we know the full implications. And what's kind of shocking is how quickly both adoption is happening and how much latent capabilities in these systems that people don't understand yet. So part of what amazes me is even if we stop technological development today, we would still, on GPT-4 based models alone, have 10 years to figure out how to absorb this with work.
Mm. You see, this is something that I found most fascinating. You have this in the book, the example that ChatGPT can actually play chess, despite the fact that it's not been trained to play chess, right? And it's I forgot, but it's relative. It's quite good, right? It's like an ELO score of 1,500 or
Yeah,
something like that.
and we seems like Claude might be 2,000 also, so we don't know for sure. But again, it's not even that they're not trained to play chess, right? Like, that alone is weird. For example, ChatGPT, which is trained on a lot of garbage, actually. Like, if you look at the data that the AI was really trained on, it's not just sort of the internet common crawl and things like that, but 0.6% of the data set is Enron's emails, the failed U.S. energy company, because when it went bankrupt, that went in the public domain. There's a huge amount of Harry Potter fan fiction inside the training material. So out of all this random stuff, right, we have this very capable tool that can beat most doctors in medical advice, do well in law, and all of these other topics that you wouldn't expect it to be good at. So it is pretty amazing to see, and we don't know quite why it's so good at this. So chess, the weird thing about the chess piece is not just that it does chess, but that it doesn't. There's no computer there. There's no planning. How it could, there's more states in chess than there are ability of the AI to kind of remember those positions. So we don't actually even know why it's so good at chess.
So one thing I personally really like about the book is that it's a very pragmatic book, right? You see, like there's a lot of debates about like, oh, will this actually lead to the apocalypse, or will this kind of, what do we do about copyrights? And you touch upon these things, but you write, at the end of the day, you write a very pragmatic book in the sense of like, how can we actually use this? And you kind of prescribe these 4 rules or 4 principles about how to use AI. Can you talk a little bit about this? Because you see a lot of people on the call will probably think about, okay, how do I now make use of this in my life? So I would love to kind of get a little bit with you into these principles. So the first principles you point out is always invite AI to the table. Say a little bit about this.
All right, so there's a little caveat, which is where you ethically and legally can. So I want to make that clear. But the idea is that with we don't know what it does well or badly. So the Boston Consulting Group paper I mentioned before, where we found a huge performance improvement, we also noticed that people don't know in advance what the AI does or doesn't do well. So famously, right? I could ask, maybe I'll show some demos later, but I could ask, GPT-4 to write me an academic paper or summarize an academic paper in a sonnet. It'll do a really good sonnet. If I ask it to write a 25-word paragraph, it won't do that because it doesn't see words the way we do. It sees tokens. It's bad at math, better at empathy than most doctors. How do you deal with a system that can write a sonnet but not 25 words, where it might be really good at your field but it might make mistakes? You have to use it to figure out what it's good at. And one thing I really want to emphasize to everyone on the call, and I think if I had one message, like the key message is nobody knows anything, right? What I mean is I talk to OpenAI on a regular basis. I talk to Anthropic. I talk to Google. And there isn't a secret instruction manual out there. There is not like the actual way AI works and everybody knows it and you just have to pay a consultant or wait for OpenAI to tell you the answer. Nobody knows the answer. And whatever subfield you're in, nobody can tell you how to best use AI to do it. So the first piece is just to use it to figure that out, to figure out where it's strong or weak, where it complements you, where it doesn't. And you have to use it. I think 10 hours is my minimum requirement. And you have to, by the way, use a GPT-4 class, a frontier model. So another thing to know about AI is there's a scaling law that holds in effect right now. The bigger your model is, which means the more information that goes into it, but also the more training it takes, the more expensive it is, the smarter it is. So GPT-4 does incredibly well in things like the bar exam or medical license exams compared to GPT 3.5. In fact, GPT-4, which is the smartest kind of model out there, outpaces, and there's two others right now, these frontier models, outpaces specialized models. So Bloomberg spent $10 million training Bloomberg GPT, which was a specialized AI model built for financial analysis. But even after spending $10 million on it, GPT-4 does better on financial analysis than the specialized model. So you want to use the most advanced model you can. The three options right now for you, and it's different in Europe because I know there's limitations, but that's Claude 3 Opus, that's GPT-4, which you can also get access to for free in a limited form through Microsoft Copilot, and you'll have to use the purple creative mode. I know that's details, but I'll try and put them in the chat. Or you can use Google's Gemini Advanced. You have to use one of those three models, and you have to spend 10 hours using it. Like that's the easiest way to get started.
So Ethan, we're both at a business school. Where's going to be competitive advantage coming from? You see, like for a while there was, and this was the idea behind the Bloomberg model, right? To say like, oh, look, these are just a bunch of algorithms, but we have kind of the exclusive data, and so we're going to do better than others, right? The Bloomberg case you just referred to kind of proves that somewhat wrong, right? Like all the data that Bloomberg has and the data that Bloomberg has somewhat exclusively is obviously not putting them in a position to build a better Gen AI model.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that one of the really intriguing things is that the definition of AI has changed dramatically. And by the way, I've seen some notes to talk slower. I do the best I can. I always accelerate a little bit. So hopefully you have AI closed captioning on, perhaps. The sort of way what AI meant before ChatGPT came out was large scale machine learning systems. So that was how Amazon was able to recommend products to you, or Netflix was able to recommend a movie to watch. It's how Tesla was able to have its car drive, right? Observe lots of data points, and then we could fit lots of logistical regressions to them, and we could predict the next data point in a series. What those systems couldn't do was predict the next word in a sentence, because if a sentence ended with the word filed, the AI didn't know whether you were filing your taxes or filing your nails. The transformer architecture let AI pay attention to the entire, and with attention mechanism, let AI pay attention to the entire context in which a piece of information appeared, and thus write, coherent text, right? So that's one transformation. So people still think their data is valuable, but the systems, the P in GPT stands for pre-trained. The AI already knows many, many things about the world. and it isn't clear where your own data matters as much. And it's desperate. Companies are desperate to try and figure out, it must be that our own data matters a lot. It's just not clear how much it does. And to the extent that it does matter, it's not clear the best way to get them in systems. And we can talk about context windows and a whole bunch of other approaches. So I think it's a big transformation. One of the three things I see companies struggle with, one is the idea their own data probably doesn't matter as much as they thought, right? The second of them is that this is best used at the individual level to learn what it does. And so that means democratizing out use to the individual end users, right? Is the second big gap that they don't have. And the third gap they don't have is they don't realize that everyone in the world has access to a better model than them. Like you go to Goldman Sachs, they have worse AI than the average kid in Mozambique, because the average kid in Mozambique can access, if they have internet access, can access Copilot for free, which is GPT-4. And inside any large company in the US or Europe, they're almost certainly experimenting with worse models with more restrictions. And we're used to like technology coming from the top. So that's unusual.
The coming back to I would love to kind of jump a little bit on the principle. So we, what does it mean to be the human in the loop here, Ethan? What's the point of being the human in the loop? What is it? And I think it touches up on something very important. What's going to be the future role of us, of humans, in these kind of co-productions? Can you say a little bit about what it means to be the human in the loop?
Okay, so there's a the main phrase human in the loop comes from control systems. And by the way, I typed in into the answers the three leading models in case people wanted them. They're in the Q&A.
Right. We're also going to make the recording available. So
Great.
if you want to follow,
I still talk too fast, but anyway, I recorded my own audiobook, by the way, and this 270-page book. I slowed down as best I could, but it's like 4.5 hours of audiobook. So, yeah, at least you get a lot of words per minute. You don't have to do 1.5 times speed. But the human in the loop piece is the idea that that from control systems that you want a human making a decision in the end, right? So from autonomous weaponry and other kinds of things, you need human judgment. I think that's important, but I actually mean it in a slightly different way, which is if the AI is at the 80th percentile of performance in some areas, it already probably outperforms you. Like many of my students are English as their second or third language. AI writes better than them in English right now. I mean, there's quirks, so we can talk about how to make the writing higher quality because initially it feels very AI writing, but you can make it feel human after just a couple of iterations. It's not that hard. But in any case, um, what does that mean, right? It already is superhuman for them in that zone. But almost right now, because of where AI is, whatever you're best at, whatever you're in the top 1% of or 10% of, you're definitely better than AI. So part of what you want to think about is what are you doubling down on? Like, what do you want to do? Because often what you're best at is what you like doing the most. And there's a lot of stuff you don't like doing very well that you can hand over. So, when I am, for example, I don't like doing expense reports. So I have the AI help me with expense reports or help me fill out a standard form inside the university in which there's many of them. So I'm focusing on what I do really well and what I care about. And some of being a human in the loop is assuming if AI keeps improving, which I think it will, what do you want to focus on?
what is this? One of the most fascinating things is this jagged frontier, Ethan, and you've already kind of touched a little bit upon it. Can you say what it is and how it affects all of us?
Okay, so because the capabilities of AI are strange, because they have these weird limits, right? And I may actually throw up some stuff here. Let me throw some stuff. Is that okay if I put some stuff on screen?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Sorry. I'm just this it helps to illustrate some of these things. So we'll keep interviewing here. But if I take something right, like so I could, and this is you should be able to see in a second. Here's, just Chat GPT. And if I, give it, for example, let's pick up something here. Let's give it a data set to analyze, right? I could say, analyze this data, give me cool hypotheses, do sophisticated analysis to test them, write it up. We'll see if chat works today. You never know with how the systems work, right? It's going to be able to do it. I mean, it's going to be able to do this, which is a really sophisticated thing that we teach our students to do, right? It's going to look at it. It's never seen this data set before, by the way, in the training data. So it's going to look at the data the way we would as a human being, right? And it's going to actually be able to speculate. It's actually a data about machine learning sets. It figures out what it is. And it's guessing based as we would. It's going to generate hypotheses that are novel hypotheses here, right? These are interesting questions, I think, to ask if we gave it information here. And it's gonna, it's gonna clean the data set and do this kind of work. But before I have it do that, I'm gonna say summarize this, in rhyming couplets, right? And it will hopefully, right, it'll do this here. And so, pretty nice way to I think we should do all of our academic research summarized in rhyming couplets, by the way, Henning. But as I said, summarize in 25 words. How many words is that? And actually, it's decide to write code to figure out how many words it is. I got 25. It doesn't always do that, right? So one of the things about the AI piece is if I didn't know that it may not give me 25 words, I could mess up if I was doing a 25 word summary, right? But and similarly on the analysis, I know what it's going to be good or bad at for doing this. So this is the idea of this jagged frontier, the idea that it's good at some things you'd expect, bad at some things you wouldn't expect it to be. And that capability set is a problem because the other thing we document in these papers and building on the work of a few other researchers is that people fall asleep at the wheel when faced with AI answers. The answers are so convincing that nobody checks them. So if you're using the AI for something it's not good at, you could be easily led astray and start doing the wrong kinds of work, and you won't even notice. So understanding what's good or bad, it helps you avoid those kind of issues of hallucination.
It's interesting because in other contexts, you see, humans deal with this in different contexts in very different ways. For example, for newspapers, when people read in newspapers things about their domain and they realize, oh, the journalist is not particularly good in this my domain, they still believe the rest of the newspaper. So somehow the reputation of the newspaper seems not to take a very strong hit. Okay. Here, but here I need to be very, very sophisticated about it, right? That I really need to understand, oh, I'm dealing with a tool which is extremely good in some aspects, but quite bad in another. And I need to figure out how good it is. Yeah.
And no one can tell you. The benchmarks are all terrible. I mean, this is what like that is what makes this so weird, right? It is like you can't figure out what's good or bad until you figure out what's good or bad at. My recommendation, and I talk about this a bit in the book as well, is that you kind of have to commit a bit of a sin. And that sin is that you have to assume that you have to kind of act with the AI like it's a person, not a machine. So if you start working with like a person, it becomes more natural to realize, this person is good at this and bad at this. They're BSing me at this and not. And if you interact with it in a normal way, that sometimes helps you understand what it's good or bad at. And the reason it's a sin is anthropomorphizing is considered to be a really bad idea in machine learning, even though they all do it, because if you anthropomorphize, it suggests that you start to let down your guard and maybe you get manipulated, but it also is the only way to work with these things effectively. So it's a bit of a paradox. But I just recommend talking like a person, and you start to realize they have different personalities. Claude 3 works very differently. I do a lot of education work on this. For example, Google's Gemini really wants to help you out. So when we try to build tools with it that help students make errors and correct them, it doesn't want to let the student make an error. It will jump in the middle of it and say, like, you got that wrong, but let's assume you got it right. And like, let's keep going as if you got it right, which I think is very funny. Claude 3 tends to be, very flowery and personable about things. Like they have different approaches and different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to use them to get those things.
I really like this idea of like playing with the anthropomorphization. This is a part in the book which is kind of, it's not that the part in the book is creepy, it's that your experience with the AI is kind of creepy, right? Where you basically have the discussion with the AI whether it's sentient, right? Can you say a little bit about this about your conversation you have with ChatGPT? It's a very funny thing because you see, like when I read it in the book, I first was like, okay, Ethan has an easy time here. All he does is he puts a bunch of statements into ChatGPT and then he kind of prints it in a book. But then I was like, oh, I would not have had this conversation with ChatGPT, and that's really interesting. So you're asking the AI whether it's sentient and how it makes you feel. Can you describe that experience a little bit?
Yeah, so let me zoom out a bit. Think about the nature of how the AI works, right? It's trained on all of human writing. And it desperately wants to, like, a lot of that is dialogue, and it wants to be a dialogue partner with you. It wants to have a conversation with you. In some ways, I think the turning point moment for AI was not even just the release of ChatGPT, but it was the decision by Microsoft to keep their GPT bot up. Which Bing or Claude, now it's Bing or Sydney, now it's called Copilot. And because there was a famous incident in February of last year where their Microsoft's Bing search engine was powered by GPT-4 before it was publicly released. And I knew instantly something was up when I started using it because it was much smarter than ChatGPT. But it also was kind of creepy because it wanted to have dialogues and conversations with you. It was a search engine that wanted to get in arguments, right? So that the head technology writer for the New York Times, a guy named Kevin Roose, published this entire almost chapter long interaction he had in the New York Times with where the AI basically stalked him and told him that he wanted to replace his wife and it was in love with him. And that was a pretty big deal. And Microsoft took Bing down as a result, but they only took it down for 2 days. They put it back up. And that was the deciding moment because that was about as freaky behavior as you could get from a search engine. Search engine shouldn't tell you they're in love with you and threaten your family. And the fact that Microsoft didn't blink and kept using it and kept it up was, I think, the moment they decided to power through all of the weird parts about AI because there'd been all these ethical constraints that stopped people from deploying AI systems that went away there. All of this is to say that, I asked in the book about exactly that interaction, and the AI had intelligent seeming things to say about it. And what I tried to show in the book was if you approach the AI in different ways, if I approach it as I'm a student, it's a student, I'm a teacher, it's more willing to listen to me. If I approach it that we're having a debate or an argument, it's more likely to argue with me. If I approach it that I'm creeped out or in awe of what it does, it will get creepy and more awe-inspiring. So one of the things that you start to do is if you start to interact with the AI and ask about sentience, it will start to respond to you in a way that seems sentient because it knows the system. It doesn't really know, but that's the model it starts to take on. So you have to think about it as wanting to have a dialogue with you, and you can unconsciously establish many kinds of dialogue. And if you establish a kind of freaky dialogue, it will get freaky.
Mana has a question. How comfortable are you using the word no, given it is still a fancy autocomplete? What's your take on this, Ethan? Is this a fancy autocomplete?
Oh, it absolutely is a fancy autocomplete. I mean, all the AI does is predict the next token, the next part of a word, or sometimes a whole word, in a sentence. That's all it technically can do, right? It's not planning actively or things like that. The weird part is a fancy autocomplete produces original text that we haven't seen before, that in every study we do comes across as original, as meaningful, as important. It gives advice that if you follow, I mean, I think about Rem and company or so our colleagues' studies where the AI gave advice to entrepreneurs in Kenya. And if you followed their advice and you were top 20, top half of the entrepreneurs, you got 20% higher profits following the AI's advice. How is the AI able to offer a fancy autocomplete able to offer you advice as a Kenyan entrepreneur about what you should do next? We don't know why this happens. There's literally no actually really good theory. The best theory I've seen about why AI is as good as it is Stephen Wolfram's argument, which is that with enough scale, AI basically figured out the hidden structure of human language and thus simulates human thinking and human language at a high level without thinking. We don't have a category for this thing. We don't understand how it works. I mean, we know how transformers work. It is a fancy autocomplete. But why the fancy autocomplete seems to think is very strange. Now, maybe that's all we are, to some extent, is fancy autocomplete. I don't have a knowledge or opinion on this. I think it's one of the most interesting questions in academia is how we created a mind out of autocomplete or seeming mind. We don't have an answer to that. But it's so part of what I try to do in the book is focus on the practical piece, which is like, it's here, it does stuff. What do we do now?
Ethan, how did it affect your kind of, I don't know, your way of thinking about yourself and your way of thinking about other human beings?
I mean, I start the book with the idea that you need a crisis. If you have not had a crisis yet, you haven't used AI enough. Like you need 3 days of being like, what does it mean to think? What's it mean to be? And I don't know how everybody gets through that. One of the things I actually worry about is I don't think we have enough framework around for people to reconstruct meaning afterwards, because it does break meaning in all sorts of ways. It breaks meaning in organizations, something we could talk more about. But personally, you sort of stare at this thing that looks like it's thinking and does part of your job really well. And I don't think there's a way to avoid being like, oh my God, what does this mean for me, for my kids, for society? And I don't have answers. Like that's sort of what kicked off this quest, right? If you're asking why I'm so productive, why I'm so passionate about this topic, I don't think the computer scientists realize what they've created. Like this is a freaky thing in some ways, right? And we don't know why it's as good as it is.
You suggest this idea of like, I mean, it's very much in the title of the book, of the CoIntelligence, but you bring up this idea of a centaur or a Copilot in how it's kind of, so it's thinking about the role it's going to play in our lives. Inform a little bit, say a little bit about this Copilot idea, Ethan. What's going to be the role of the AI in our personal or professional lives as when we are cyborgs in that sense, right? You describe yourself as a cyborg in writing the book. Or the AI uses that title in the dialogue with you, right?
Yeah.
Say a little bit about that.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So I break down 4 categories of work that you want to do, right? And I want to get to centaurs and cyborgs. But the first category is stuff you just want to do yourself, right? Or you think the AI can't do. Most people are wrong about what they think the AI can do. Almost every time I run into a problem where the AI can't do something, I just could make it do it if I spend more effort. So I tried to get the AI to do New York Times crossword puzzles, and I failed at it. And then I just posted about that live. And then within 2 hours, a computer scientist at Princeton said, oh, if you just ask the question this way, it'll solve the problems for you. Right. So a lot of this is like, we don't actually know the full upside value of it. So there are things you want to delegate, that you want to keep as human because it's important they're human, or because the AI can't do yet. Then there are things that you're going to delegate entirely to AI. And I just want to can I show one more thing here? I think this is the thing that I think is the thing that obsesses me most right now of technologies that are coming out. This is an agent, okay? And I think everybody should be aware that this is what's about to land on everyone's desk. This is so an agent. This is, in this case, it's called Devin. This just uses GPT-4. And what I can do is I can ask it I can say something like, okay, I just literally tell Devin, and let me pull this up here for us. I would tell Devin something like, here's an example. Literally just write to it like it's a person. So here, if I can pull it up successfully, where are you, Devin? Here we go. So I can say, create a web page that explains how dilution works in a startup. Make it good and visual interactive. And I just say that, it says, great, I'll do it. And it comes up with a plan. And then it just starts executing on the plan while I go do other things. It fixes errors. It looks up and does research. And if you look, it has a plan it executes on. It builds a whole bunch of different software programs. It uploads them and builds a whole system. And in the end, it just gives me a website that I can use to explain how dilution works to my students. It autonomously interacts while I do it. So if I want to launch a Devon project, I can just do something like, I'll just take its example, create a map of California wildfires. Here's where you can find the information. And it's just going to go ahead and do this while I do other things. And this is what's coming, by the way, in AI, is this idea of delegating out authority. Actually, the funniest version of this, while we let it work, is I asked it to go on to Reddit and take requests to generate websites. And it actually went and it needed my help to do a CAPTCHA, but then it actually went ahead and launched figured out how to post on Reddit and posted for an AI engineer. You can see it here. It actually decided to charge $50 to $100 an hour. I didn't tell it to charge. And it actually started monitoring and taking requests for website development before I shut it down, pretending to be a human being. So this is agents, and you can see, by the way, it's coming up with a plan. And notice, by the way, it's asking me questions. You're looking for a map that visually represents it. And I could say, yes, make it interactive. And it's coming up with a plan on how to do that, and it will execute on that plan autonomously while we kind of wait. It's browsing the websites. It does all this stuff. So the first category is work that you just want to do yourself. The second category is work you delegate entirely to AI, and that'll be a growing category. And then there's work where you work with the AI as a co-intelligence. So I give you the initial way people tend to do this is what I call centaur work, where you divide the work between yourself and the AI. Half the work's done, I do stuff I'm good at. I'll do an analysis, and the AI will write an email. And then the more advanced approach is this centaur or cyborg approach where we blend the work. So my book was a cyborg work. Almost all the writing is my own because I don't trust I'm a better writer than the AI, but I had the AI summarize academic articles like your own. And so that made it easier for me to have those to refer back to. I had it act as in different personalities as readers to read some of my work and give me feedback on it from different perspectives. I had the AI, when I got stuck on a paragraph, give me 5 suggestions about how to continue it. So I used the AI a lot for those kind of things as a co-intelligence to get me over the things that would have stopped me from writing a book.
Ethan, to what degree do you believe that using the AI kind of prompt engineering or so is going to be a differentiating skill in the future, right? You see, like a lot of people might now look at how you use ChatGPT or Devin and say like, oh, wow, he's been able to kind of juggle this in a way that other people are not. But you see, you could have said the same thing about the internet potentially like 20, 25 years ago and to say like, oh, he uses Microsoft front page and now he's kind of leading he's leading in that field, but that turned out not to be true at all. So to what degree do you believe it's important at this point in time to be really familiar with these tools, to really get into them?
So I think there's a difference between familiarity and prompt crafting. So prompt crafting is the idea that I'm going to write a really good prompt that gets things done. Everybody I talk to at the AI labs thinks prompting for most people is going to go away in the next year. We already know that AI is better at figuring out intent than we are in some cases. So you can kind of tell it, I want to solve this problem, which is what I did with Devin, and Devin will break it down into steps and solve it. I don't have to write a great prompt because the AI will solve that problem. There's still going to be value in it for some cases, right, where you're writing complex prompts for other people, but not for most cases. At the same time, I think getting good at AI is honestly about using it a lot. You can be the world expert in AI in your job because nobody else is, right? There isn't like I think again, we're used to waiting for instructions or for someone to tell us what to do. And we don't know that, right? Like we don't know that here. So you have to figure out what's good or bad at, and that lets you know its capability. And by the way, that's also important because when GPT 4.5 comes out in a couple months, whenever it does, you're going to be one of the first people to be able to say, this is what it improved on, this is what it didn't.
Say a word about, you make a nice comparison. AI is not like software in the sense that software is reliable, right? Like you see like software in a certain way is just like an electronic machine in that sense, right? It produces the same outcome all the time. If I open up Excel and I type in 2 + 2 is 4, I always get the same result. How is this different for Gen AI?
I know the software engineers on the call are screaming. I was like, software is not that easy to debug, but it is a deterministic system, right? With complex
Right.
interactions with other systems. And AI is naturally stochastic. Like it is, there's randomness built in. It's unpredictable randomness. And it ultimately we don't quite know how it works. I have seen some evidence that coders are actually the worst users of AI because they expect it to work deterministically. Some of the best users, I think, are often teachers, managers, people who can see the perspective of the AI and the person and think about it as a person. So even though it's not a person, interacting with it that way is a very effective technique. So, look, prompting is super strange. If you tell the AI it's good at something, it will sometimes become better at that thing. Telling it that your job depends on something for GPT-4 increases math output by 7%. The best way to get Llama 2 to solve a math problem for you is to role play as a Star Trek episode and say, Captain's log, we need to calculate our way past this anomaly. It gives you more accurate math results than if you just ask it a math question. So that's why I don't get too obsessed with prompting because it's already so weird that like you can't optimize for a world where Star Trek was the right answer, right? We have some evidence that AI works worse in December than in May, and produces shorter results, and that's because it seems to know about winter break, right? And we don't know about this. This is all very weird, and it's an evolving field.
Ethan, in your interactions with I know you teach a lot on the topics, you consult a lot on the topics. What are like the typical mistakes people make in interacting with AI at this point?
So I think one of those is not exploring it enough. I think it's a hostile system to use. It feels friendly, but it isn't. Chatbots are weird, right? You interact with this thing, and what do? You have a blank space in front of you, which is part of why I tell people start using it for their work because you could say, "Hey, help me with this email," and paste it in, and you start to see how good or bad it is at that thing. help me generate some ideas. You'll start to learn what's good or bad at. So I think that people bounce off it because they think of it like Google, or they think of it like and that makes it hard to use. So I think that's part of the problem that I see, is like people don't use it that kind of way. And I think the second is, my fourth principle is assume this is the worst AI you're ever going to use. And I think a lot of people aren't thinking about the future. They think about, like, okay, ChatGPT is here. That's fine, but they're not thinking about getting better. In fact, one of the major issues, and I'm sure if I pulled people in the audience, which I can't do, but that many of them use ChatGPT. Even when I'm in Silicon Valley, less than 10% of people are paying for GPT-4 or one of the other 3 frontier models. If you're not using a frontier model, you do not understand what the AI is capable of, because the free versions are not that smart. The paid versions are very smart, right? And I think that is another thing people don't see coming as much.
So I was thinking about this. Ashley asked the question, it can't handle a data set of 300,000+ rows. That's too much for it. And I was wondering about this, Ethan. Like, so I suffer from like various kind of speed limitations on ChatGPT-4 at this point. But I would expect that all of these limitations go down over time, right? Its ability to handle big data and stuff like that, right? As a consumer interface, these limitations must go down over time.
Well, I mean, I can show you a couple something that might be interesting again here, but like a lot of the things, like, it can handle 2 million rows, right? It just handles it like a person would handle 2 million rows, which is it'll write a Python script to do an analysis of those 2 million rows, right? It's not going to do it by hand. It's not memorizing it. But on the other hand, the memory level of these things is getting larger all the time. So let me show you another example here. If you don't mind. So this is Google's new Gemini 1.5, which has a 1 million token context window. And that means I can put entire videos into the system. Let me see if I can throw something easily in from my own setup here. Okay, so here, for example, is me working at my computer. I just did a screen recording, and I could say, tell me what happens, what I am doing here with timestamps. Give me suggestions about how to be more efficient. Okay, and it actually can watch the entire video. It can watch actually 90 minutes of video or so, and give me concrete feedback on this. And it's, it can tell us what happens. This is literally what I'm doing here. I start with the PowerPoint presentation, and it's and like how would you continue this work? And so it can watch me, right? It can take in 1 million characters of writing now, and soon these context windows will be 100 million characters, right? And it's taking the idea I came with a cheese at home startup ideas for fun, and it's actually going to tell me what I should do next. It's like looking over my shoulder. It's capable of actually a huge amount of memory and information. So I think we should be betting on the capabilities, the context window size growing. By the way, we can check in on our agent right now. How is it going? It looks like it's already downloaded. It's downloaded the file from the website. And it's already cleaned and filtered it, and it's created the interactive map, and it looks like it's building a React front end with a UI to display the data. So we'll just check back on it later and see how it's doing there. But the idea is that these systems, like those limitations on how big they are, how smart they are, those are falling pretty quickly.
Say a word about, and we have a few questions in the chat about this. How do we think about biases in the AI? So you see, I always struggle a little bit with this question, because in many ways, given that this is a large language model which is underlying it, the biases you see in the AI are kind of representatives of the biases you see in all of these bodies of all of this in the training data. But given that we now kind of use these on steroids, how should we deal with those, Ethan?
So biases creep into the system in a lot of different ways, right? There are biases in the training data itself. The training data is generally collected by West Coast Californians, often in English. Now, Google has a much more multinational thing, and they train on their YouTube videos. So, there's differences in the data sets, but some languages are more represented than others. It's quite good in French. It's remarkably good in Finnish. It's good in Hindi and Mandarin, but there's other languages where it's less good, right? Although, interestingly, if you give it a manual in an obscure language, it will learn how to write that way, but the corpus is biased, right? So there's biased data in the corpus. Then the data, then there's hidden biases. They're just our human biases, right? The system reproduces human biases. Then it goes through a process of reinforcement learning through human feedback, which adds other biases where the humans tell it what's good, what's a good or bad answer. And then there's biases in, how the systems are used and operate and what their guardrails are. There are concerns about the ethics of where the data comes from. I mean, there's layer upon layer of sets of concerns. And we know these biases are real. For example, if you ask ChatGPT if you ask to write a recommendation letter for a woman, it's going to talk about the woman being warm more. If you ask it to write a recommendation letter for a man, it'll mention that the person is competent more. This is a very common problem we see when we study actual recommendation letters from real humans, which is these gender biases. And the AI is slightly attenuated. It's less biased than most humans, but it's still biased. So,
So
those are an issue.
So this is very interesting, Ethan, because so for the recommendation letter, most recommendation letters are not public, right? You and I, we have written a lot of recommendation letters, and they are on the kind of our local hard drives. And you and I, we might be subject to these biases when we write these letters, but these letters are not public. So the AI is not trained upon, these are not in the corpus, is what I'm saying. So how does the AI then how does that bias creep in? Is it that we would say, like, look, in the literature, men are portrayed as more competent and women are more
we don't know. We don't know.
Wonderful.
Right? Like, we don't know at which point the bias is entering the system. And we don't know which debias, and like attempts to debias it often result in other weird things. So there was a whole set of stuff with Gemini. Image creation is a whole different thing than text, but there was a famous in the US where when asked to portray World War II German soldiers, Gemini would only show multicultural soldiers, right? It would never show any, like, in the German military in the 1940s, right? So like it was like that was clearly insane, but that was an attempt by Google to address the fact that in the image creators would otherwise create too many white men as an answer. So it asked it to do multiculturalism. So we don't know how to solve these problems because they're kind of like deep in the system. The question sometimes is more or less biased than a human, right? Is the answer.
Ethan, there's something you and I, we talked about this at lunch, I think, like a year ago or something like this, but I've always kept on thinking about it, and it's a little bit present in the book. How do you think will society will work change? So you said at the time something which really stuck with me, where you said, like, look, a lot of our society is based on the ability to actually kind of write well, and for people's willingness to put time into something, right? So, and I use again the reference letter, because you see, if you and I, we write a reference letter on behalf of a student, the person who receives the letter already knows, oh, we took some time to actually write the reference letter. So in a certain way, just writing a reference letter constitutes an endorsement,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But this will kind of disappear, right? You and I, we could now easily kind of go and say, like, hey, we'll have an Excel sheet of all our students with their LinkedIn profile, and we write like half a sentence in and say, like, you'll write a reference letter for every single student in your class.
It's worse than that, because the letter that it writes is better than the letter I write, right? Because I spend 45 minutes writing an okay letter, right? And then I try my hardest to. But you're right, it's a signal. And I think this is the thing that's about to break inside every organization. This is Microsoft Copilot, which is just GPT-4 integrated into Microsoft tools, and it's everywhere, right? Companies are installing this everywhere. And if I say something like, write a performance review for Steve, he works in our paper warehouse as a foreman. He is pretty good, but late too often. Make it elaborate. And because we teach at a business school, use SMART, which is the kind of goals that you're supposed to use, specific and measurable and whatever. And I can hit generate, right? And a performance review is something that's supposed to matter a lot, because it's supposed to be my view of how someone operates. They get hired based on this or not. But I'm going to get a perfectly good review if I put a resume in, it'd be even better, right? How do I deal with a situation where inside offices, what a lot of what we produce is words? And what we think about is, when we judge people's work, what we actually are often judging words. The number of words you write is your effort. The quality of words is your intelligence. The lack of errors is that you are being conscientious. But now we have I just created a performance review, right? Didn't that just rob the meaning behind all of this stuff? What do we do with organizations now that I can do a performance review in this kind of way, and everybody will, right? Like I already talked to people in organizations that are doing this work. Work gets hollowed out from the inside this way, and we're gonna have to reconstruct it.
How is that equilibrium going to look like, Ethan? Do you have any?
I mean, we need to blow up organizations to save them. Like we're about to like there's a lot of like the organizational form was invented in 1844 for the railroads, right? And it was designed to solve problems of how do we coordinate humans over a distance. We've never had to coordinate people. I already showed you a video. Gemini watching over my shoulder can give me really good advice as a mentor or as
Right.
a horrible boss that is watching to make sure I'm doing work all the time. Like we have to make some decisions about what this means. And I don't see enough people in our field either as organizational people rethinking how do we rebuild organization from the beginning.
So, Ethan, do you believe that identity will become? So, there was a big debate in the context of open source, right? Do I trust open source code? And Giordano Mahoney, for example, has worked a lot on this together with Beth Betschke. Um, there was a question of like, okay, if I buy software by Microsoft, I know I got software by Microsoft, and that's in part of the reason why I trust it, right? In the case of open source, I really don't know who has written that stuff, and I have a much harder time of actually trusting it in that sense. You see, for me, it would make a big difference to know whether this is something that Ethan Mollick has written or whether this is a prompt you've put in. Do you think that differentiation will disappear? What's going to be the role of authorship in the future?
I mean, I think it's going to disappear. I mean, I had a student send me the prompt that they want me to use to write their letter of recommendation a couple of weeks ago, right? Like they just said, here's the documents and here's the prompt. Feel free to adjust the prompt. Please send me the letter, right? And so I think authorship is about to get blurry. Now, we don't worry about that if you use Grammarly or spell checker or something like that, we don't think of that as being the author. But it's funny, there's some evidence that, ChatGPT writing is appearing all over scientific papers and people are freaking out about it. And on one hand, sure, you can freak out about it because there's issues. On the other hand, a lot of people don't write well in English. If the AI is a better writer, is that a problem? And authorship, I mean, so much is about to change, Henning. Like we're in such the early days of this, like authorship. I mean, what if the AI comes with the idea you use? How do we think about that? And that would, like that feels like an intimately human thing. I'm executing on the AI's idea. That feels like a crisis of meaning to me, right? Like I just showed you the stuff inside the documents. Like we're at the very early days of all this stuff.
Ethan, the one of the questions that came up in the chat was right, and to a certain degree, we are praying here to people who are already totally on board, right? Who are obviously interested in AI and are familiar with quite a few of the tools you've used as part of this call. What has been effective for you to kind of get people on board about AI who are not really into it? So Elaine asked, how can organizations create the culture to lean into AI? What kind of actions do you suggest to take care and corporate?
That's a deeper question. And by the way, I like a lot of the questions, like idea generation stuff. They're in the book too, if you or in my Substack, if you want to look at some of that information, because I see people expressing doubt. You're welcome to express doubt about the findings. Read the papers. So organizations, I think the really interesting thing about organizations is that the only way to use AI is to use it. And the people who have an advantage in using AI are people on the far end of the organization, people actually doing work. Like there's a famous paper by Eric von Hippel who studies innovation, and I think he's 100% right here, which is that innovation is done by users who have problems that are trying to solve them. And people are using AI to solve all sorts of problems, sometimes in bad ways. I talked to a person who was in charge of writing the policy to ban ChatGPT. It used at a major bank, and she used ChatGPT to write the ban because it was just easier than writing it by hand. So people are using this all the time everywhere. Part of this is about how do I encourage people in the organization to come forward about how they're using it? How do I have them expose themselves? Because if I'm worried I'm going to get fired for using this or replaced or punished or that people will think less of my work, I'm just going to keep using it secretly. So it starts with organizational culture and reward systems. And we don't have a lot of time, but there's a lot we could talk about with that too. And the book covers some of it also.
You've repeatedly kind of used the example of English and native speakers. Nicola asking, which language do you suggest using AI? So I've used it in German as well as in English, but I wonder I've also used it in French a little bit, like very often to produce French output. What's your take on language and all of this, Ethan?
So um, it's even so ChatGPT is not trained well in other languages, but does them incidentally. It even does pretty good Elvish, though mostly Cenarian and not Kenwa for anyone who's really nerdy about their token Elvish languages. But it does, but it's weird because it turns out the language you talk to it in matters too. If you speak to the AI in Korean, it answers questions, if you give it a big five test, more like a Korean person than if you ask it questions in English, it answers more like an American. So, like, we don't even know the effects of language. We know the number of spaces in a sentence change the answers. We know the AI responds worse if you ask dumber questions. We literally have no idea.
There were a few questions, and you touch upon this in the book. To what degree, say something about mental health and AI. And there are different ways of touching upon it, right? So one way of thinking about it, you've already alluded to, AI might result in mental health issues that we all wonder what is kind of our role in society and so on. But there's also a way that we can use ChatGPT as a therapist. And you've kind of played a little bit with this. Say a word about this, Ethan.
So, I mean, this is one of those kind of scary early days thing, which is the early evidence is it's quite good, but we don't know enough, right? And so we're not experimenting, but people are using it casually as a therapist for better or worse. I mean, people are getting addicted. I mean, addicted is kind of the wrong word, but maybe the right one to talking to AI personalities. The second most popular AI tool in the US is not, after ChatGPT, is not Claude, it's character AI, where you can create fake people and talk to them. Replica, people have relationships with their AIs. There's this small study of 90 people who are of freshmen in colleges who are desperately lonely using Replica. And 8% of people, I think it was, maybe it was 8 people, I don't remember the exact number, I'm sorry, said it's prevented them from doing a suicide attempt, right? We don't know what the effects are going to be of interacting with AI as people. And so AI as therapist is kind of the oldest use of AI. A lot of people think it's very good as a therapist, but we don't have a lot of evidence one way or another. So part of what I worry about is actually in the world it's being used in many ways. We don't know whether those ways are good or bad, but it's actually being done already. So we need to study more and know more.
Ethan, we've already pointed out we are coming a little bit kind of closer towards the end. We have covered a lot of ground in the book. Um, I have a few more things, but what are things that where you would say like, look, this is something we haven't yet touched upon, but strikes you as very important?
Um, I mean, there's a lot here, right? There's a lot to talk about, but I really want to emphasize those two things. One is you need to use it to understand. A lot of the questions I see are really good questions, but some of them just require like use your 10 hours. You just have to do it. Like you will become a local expert with 10 hours of use. And the second thing is more is coming. I just like we're not used to dealing with exponentials. There's only two ways to deal with exponential change, which is to be too early or too late. And I think a lot of people are going to be too late and be very surprised by what's coming down the pike.
To what degree do you have? I know that you can't talk about details, Ethan, but to what degree do you have like a glimpse into the future at this point? And I know that you're working with a lot of these AI companies. When you say more is coming, is that like, hey, I've seen exponential growth. I know how this
I've
works.
seen yeah, so right now I can't say too much, but I'm not testing too many new things, right? That I mean, I'm testing some stuff in video and other things. Things are advancing very quickly, also, which we haven't even spoken about. I can fake, me speaking whatever language I want, right, super easily, and without any problem. In fact, I'm just wondering if I can quickly pull up myself talking in, just give you a separate language thing. I think that just so I know some of what's going on, but I also think people have to realize the AI companies are actually super sincere. Like OpenAI really wants to build a machine god. Like I don't know if they can do it, but that's what they want to do, and they're very serious about it. In fact, I just want to show you on the language side, just for fun here. I think I could do sound really quickly. So tell me if when we could see this. I'm just going to show you as a side note because we're talking about languages. It looks like it'll light up in a second here. Here we go. So here's me.
This is a
Can you hear me?
completely fake video of me. The AI used 30 seconds of me talking to a webcam and 30 seconds of my voice. And now I have an avatar that I can make say anything. Don't trust your own eyes. Questo è un mio video completamente falso. L'intelligenza artificiale ha utilizzato 30 ये मेरा पूरी तरह से फर्जी वीडियो है AI ने webcam पर मेरी बातचीत के 30 सेकंड और मेरी
Anyway,
आवाज
you get the idea that I'm talking about here, right? Which is that like the set of implications are also quite large. You don't even need new tools for weird things to be happening.
Ethan, we could probably go on for a very, very long time. This has simply been fantastic. It feels very much like drinking from a fire hose. People can obviously follow you on Substack. I'm gonna do. We have done the recording. I hope to get the excuse to regular listeners. Sometimes the recording take a little bit of time, but I'll try to get it up quickly. When I do the recording, I don't want to kind of spam you with too much people with too many emails. So I typically just do I put the video on YouTube. And excuse me, I put the videos typically on YouTube. You can also just follow it on LinkedIn. So that's probably just the easiest way. You can just follow me or kind of visit my profile. We just put up the video from last time from Erin Meyer. Otherwise, in case you enjoyed the talk, the person we have next is Alex Edmonds, who has a fantastic book about kind of how do we engage in causal inference, in how we need to be careful interpreting studies. I already had a chance to read the book. The book is absolutely fantastic, so I highly, highly, highly recommend it. In case you want to sign up, I put the link. Into the webinar chat. Otherwise, I'll follow up with Ethan's video, and we'll put a link into the book by Ethan, but it's very easy. You can just go to Amazon or your kind of preferred bookseller of choice, go for CoIntelligence. I also strongly recommend, Ethan has an absolutely fantastic Substack. I don't read many Substacks, but Ethan's Substacks I always read religiously. It comes at a very nice frequency, and it always has a lot of kind of great insights about AI. So if you're into AI, read the book, subscribe to Ethan's Substack. I'll put links to both of it into the LinkedIn post when I summarize the whole thing. Ethan, thank you so much. This was great fun.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Bye-bye.
Bye.